Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to step 3 of how to start a cannabis farm, county application and the application process. So, what I want to discuss first and foremost about the application. If you don't know exactly how you're going to do this, exactly how you're going to accomplish going from, seed to sale, this is where you accomplish it. In the sense of you can't get past this unless you know what the fuck you're doing. You can bullshit all the other stuff, but this is actually where you put it on paper and obviously submit it to the criticism of everybody else. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and actually I have my application right in front of me. So just a brief overview. There are multiple types of applications within your, county, specifically here in Jackson County. One of the types, actually, type 1, for instance, would be an application submitted where you're just doing a standard outdoor cultivation. There are no structures, no new structures, essentially an outright farm use. And that's what type 1 applications are. They are applications for outright uses based on the zoning of your property. So again, things like farming. Now, type 2, which is what I had to submit, would be where you're adding something like a new structure, for instance, like a greenhouse. And so that's why I had to submit a type 2. And actually, even though we don't have any greenhouses on the property now, and that's something I'll go into a little bit further, but so your type 2 application, at least mine, you have to have your legal description of your subject property. It'll include your township, your range, your section, your tax lot, and your acreage. Obviously, you'll have to put your street address and the zoning of the property. You're just trying to make their job that much easier, and essentially that's what your application is. You'll have to submit who the property owner is and who the applicant is. What else? You'll also have to list some of the utilities that are on your property. For instance, things like an on-site septic system. Are you using an on-site well or municipal water? Are you using electric service, solar, gas, propane, community sewer, community water, public sewer, phone service? You need to provide any documentation for easements to your property. So my specific property, there is an easement to it, not only with the actual landowners, because I'm surrounded on 3 sides by the same family. So I have to have an easement with them, but I also have an easement with the electric company for them to physically come on my property to deal with the power lines. And so you'll have to provide documentation of that. You'll also have to provide some sort of supporting information that states what's going on around you. And further on in the application, you'll have to describe how you're not going to affect the current accepted farm and forest practices in the area based on your proposal. So again, a standard description of your proposal will be, I would like to farm recreational marijuana or cannabis on this property using a mixture of outdoor and greenhouse methods for your specific scenario. Obviously indoor, doesn't matter. Describing some of the uses for adjacent properties, it obviously depends on where you are. If you're next to a laundromat, that's what you got to say. For my specific thing, north, the property is unused, it was landlocked, and there's no easements to the property, as in they will have to paradrop in if they want to actually access, because nobody's going to give them an easement to it. To the east of me, there are light trail riding horses, south unused, west light logging, simple stuff. For my specific type 2 application, one of the things that I had to state was, do certain land development ordinance requirements apply, or I guess not requirements, whatever's apply to me based on my zoning. So for instance, because I'm in a resource zone, this specific land ordinance, development ordinance section actually applies to me, which is where you have to go forth and then begin answering how your proposal will not affect other people who are operating on that resource land around you. And that's actually what you'll have to do on the next couple pages. It'll give you a section where you can answer it on the separate page. You're going to have to answer it on a separate page. One of the other things that you're going to have to describe is how your proposal will not greatly increase the fire hazard around you or the cost of fire suppression, or that increase the danger to fire suppression personnel. So you'll have to figure that out. And I can go into that a little bit further. What else? Standard signature. Obviously, you'll just have to, or whoever's doing this, will have to sign and put their entire company and whatnot. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and read you what I have, because I feel like that's the best way to give you a cheat code. And again, this was accepted, so there's that also. All right. So just to summarize this, because the subject property is within a forest resource zone, I have to explain why my proposal will not force a significant change, significantly increase the cost, increase the risk of to fire suppression personnel, or increase the fire hazard and fire suppression costs to the accepted farm and forest practices on surrounding lands devoted to farm and forest use. So again, this is all just really close-knit kind of shit. In order to not or create any significant change, increase the cost, or increase the risk of fire and correlating costs of fire suppression to accepted farm and forest practices on surrounding lands devoted to farm and forest use, the following issues have been addressed. The location of my farm is not viewable from any immediate surrounding properties or roadways. It's away from all other farm and forest practices on lands devoted to farm and forest use. Due to the over-allocation of groundwater and water rights, approximately 50 to 90% of my water will be trucked in, while the remaining water will be harvested from rain. This will prevent accepted farm or forest practices from having to change due to water table issues caused by overuse, which tends to be the most common reason for cost increases. This will also allow us to keep water on hand for fire suppression. Watering of all crops will be done so by a regulated drip system to reduce and eliminate waste to runoff. A road will be put around the perimeter of the entire property, which will double as another fire break and allow access with a water trailer for portable fire suppression. This allows for faster fire response, potentially helping to solidify and save accepted farm and forest practices on surrounding lands while reducing the cost of fire suppression personnel. The road will also allow access to areas in which firefighters weren't able to reach due to lack of roads and rural nature, which also reduces costs and risks to fire suppression personnel. So what I'm trying to prove to them is that as a byproduct of my proposal, I will actually benefit everyone and potentially help save lives and reduce costs at the same time. You're basically trying to persuade the county that you're not a hazard, and that you at least take responsibility for what you're doing. You'll have to describe your specific farming practices. Now, we can get into that, but I don't think this is the time. For my specific, scenario, we're doing all closed loop, no-till organics. We plan on using bacteria and bringing bacteria in to help with element fixing. We create our own organic biomass through cover crops. We feed soil, and we feed microbes, and we feed fungi, and we feed bacteria, and we feed worms, and they feed plants, not the other way around. So for me to really get into that, it's just kind of pointless right now. But you do need to say how you're going to farm, what types of nutrients or amendments you'll be using. Are you going to be growing hydroponically, aeroponically? Are you going to be growing in a greenhouse? Are you going to be doing outdoor? Are you going to be doing light dep, indoor? Are you going to be using, whatever. You'll have to describe your IPM program, or your integrated pest management program, essentially showing how you're going to make sure that none of these cannabis-related pests or issues related to them, or even the nutrient or pesticides that you're using or herbicides that you're using, how those are not going to affect everybody else, or how you have backup plans in place. So again, you'll have to describe your farming practices. And again, this is where you'll figure all your shit out to the T. Your structures. So here in Jackson County, Section 8.7 of the Land Development Ordinance Code, it relates to fire hazards and new structures. And I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's stuff like, you can't have anything, any vegetation within, like 30 feet or 100 feet of, a new building, and certain types of brush or trees aren't allowed to be there. And you have to have everything trimmed up to, I don't know, 6 feet or 3 feet or however high it is, depending on what it is. So you'll just have to be aware of that. There should be some sort of checklist with the application to make things a little bit easier for you to figure out. Luckily, here in Jackson County, because they've been doing this shit forever, the checklist includes things like a to scale plot plan, the description of your proposal, and all the required documentation showing your water rights. What else? It also asks that you are essentially aware and agree to be in compliance for things like, the dark sky, which is, you can't have your lights on from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., or you have to have, I guess, dark sky type lighting, which I think it shines down, not up. You can't have tents. Your water has to come from a lawful source. Your cannabis waste will be stored in a secured waste receptacle. Your security cameras can't be facing, your neighbor's property. They got to be on your property. And that you're not using something like like a farm dwelling or a farmhouse in conjunction with cannabis use, because here in Oregon that's just not allowed, I guess. And also that your fencing is up to par and whatnot. Some of the issues previously, they required fencing and people were putting up tarps and hay bales and shade cloth, just doing what they needed to get by. And people thought that it was eyesores and just found something else to bitch about. So they wanted real fencing, and then they required, 8-foot solid fencing. And so then all of a sudden you'd be driving down the highway or something and you'd see a giant field, and then just smack dab in the field is a massive wooden fence that's just completely out of place, and it looks like an eyesore even more. And they kind of backed off the 8-foot thing, and now it's like 6 foot, and it doesn't have to be solid. It just has to be, made of non-temporary materials. So you could put some, a T-post and some horse fence up and call it a day. Let's see. What else? The biggest part, and I think what took me the longest on the application, was really my plot plan. I think everybody, once you start getting to this point, you're somewhat aware of what you do and don't want to do. But the plot plan is logistics. There's a concept called lean production that I think was developed by Toyota. And there's actually a book on it. There's a couple books on lean production. It's the idea that wasting something like a footstep is wasted money. It makes no sense to have, let's just say like your pens at one end of the warehouse and your paper at the other end of the warehouse. You're working outside. That's just a waste of time. And so trying to create something that has an efficient flow to it, and multiple people can work around, seems to be the most difficult part, because people just put shit places, and that's kind of what it is. And if your specific area or your specific property doesn't allow for an efficient design, fuck it, do what you got to do. If you can create an efficient design out of an inefficient space through moving some earth, do it. I think it's worth it. I mean, you're talking about developing something where you're gonna have to deal with it every fucking day of your life. Like, efficiency and logistics definitely need to be play a role. You know, where are people going to drive into? Where are they going to turn around at? Is it going to be easy for them? Things like, you know, having your greenhouses too close so that they shade each other. If you don't have the space, you don't have the space. But if you do have the space, think about it. So anyways,